The foot is a bag of bones, but a bag of bones on its own is quite useless. And that's why we have a number of things to join these bones all together. We've got the shape of the bones themselves, which we have alluded to before. We've got static stabilizers, which include ligaments, which is going to be what we talk about today. And we've got dynamic stabilizers, which are the muscles and tendons, which is also the subject of another talk. These all work together quite well, but sometimes you'll find that shapes, for example, the ankle mortise, is not enough on its own, as you can see over here. So we need static stabilizers. But what are these static stabilizers? Well, again, you can see a list of them here, and this is quite a long list, so you can pause the video and watch it at your leisure. So then, back to statics. We want to convert this to this. Now, the individual ligaments are important, but I'm less interested in the individual ligaments today because they're boring. I'm more interested in discussing how they all interplay together to create the foot as a single functional unit. Now, there are two prevailing models of how the foot functions. One of them is as a curved beam, and the other one is as a truss. But what are these terms and what do they mean? Well, I'm glad you asked, and let's explore them a bit more. A beam is a structure which goes longitudinally, and the weight or load is applied perpendicular to this. Often, the load will be on either end. So in the foot, for example, you get some load at the calcaneum, over here, and some load at the metatarsal heads. The foot is a curved beam, and that means that it resists the load coming on it from the top and the bottom at the calcaneum and metatarsal heads. And this force gets evenly distributed. If you look at the overall rough shape of the foot, you'll see that the bag of bones is held together by a combination of joint capsules, a plethora of plantar ligaments, including the spring ligaments and Lisfranc ligaments, and this creates a compression force at the top and a tension force at the bottom. Now, this is important to understand because this is why the plantar ligaments are usually stronger and thicker, and arguably more important than the dorsal ligaments. It's also why you get osteoarthritis on the dorsal surface before the plantar surface. Quite simply, it's the compression side. This old banana is a perfect example of the foot as a beam. The skin is all the plantar supporting structures, and you take the weight on either end. As you load, you stretch on the tension side and compress on the compression side. Eventually, if the plantar structures fail, you'll get compression and arthritis on the top. So that's a beam. So then what is a truss? Well, quite simply, a truss is another engineering concept where a structure is built out of triangles, and there can be many triangles stacked together. Just as in the beam, there's a tension side and a compression side. And once again, the tension side's on the bottom and the compression side is at the top. The foot is a very simple truss with just a single triangle formed by the bony architectures on the top. And the plantar surface, which is parallel to the ground, is formed from the plantar fascia. Here we see that in the foot itself, the plantar fascia does not attach to the metatarsal head. In fact, it bypasses the metatarsal head and uses the metatarsal head as a pulley and then attaches to the proximal phalanx. When you walk, the proximal phalanx pulls up and therefore the plantar fascia becomes tight. The combination of the truss formed by the bony architecture and the plantar fascia, and the fact that the plantar fascia attaches across a pulley to the proximal phalanx, creates a very simple windlass mechanism. But what is a windlass mechanism? Well, essentially, it is a simple form of pulley where a load is applied at one end, usually a crank, which causes an object to move at the other. In this case, the crank is the proximal phalanx, and the load moved is the arch of the foot. Here you see a very crude representation of the windlass mechanism in the foot and ankle. The cardboard is the bones and the plantar fascia is the rope. What you see is that during toe off, the toe will dorsiflex. And as it dorsiflexes, the plantar fascia gets tighter, and that actually pulls the arch of the foot higher. That's really important because it means that during toe off, which is when you need to get the propulsion, the foot arch is higher and therefore stiffer, and therefore gives a more effective platform for propulsion, which makes the gait more effective. If you have a problem with the plantar fascia or any of that mechanism, or you have an arch which fails to rise up on standing on tiptoes, then you lose efficiency of gait and it actually makes walking much harder. Of course, the converse is also true. And when you put weight on the foot, the body weight goes through the bones, which tries to flatten out the arch, and the plantar fascia then pulls down on the proximal phalanx. As such, what you see here is that the proximal phalanx and therefore the toe makes contact with the ground passively without any effort on the part of the person walking. That again is really important because it's an important energy saving technique. Now, that leads me into an important segue. Why do we have toes? Well, toes exist essentially to spread the load on walking. So the toes, in fact, take up to 50% of the load that the metatarsal head does, and so prevents metatarsalgia and other types of forefoot problems. And that's why people who have problems with the plantar fascia, problems with the toes going down and touching the ground, often get symptoms of forefoot overload. Right, back to the original topic. We've now described the windlass mechanism and the reverse windlass mechanism, and hopefully that all makes sense. Feel free to watch the video again, as these are difficult concepts to understand. Hope you enjoyed this lecture.